I started in 1947 when I entered Caltech as a freshman, and everybody was razzle-dazzled by the event that summer of Roswell. Roswell was something that was spectacular. The word UFO was kicked around campus, and in most of our bull sessions at the house, we wondered if we were alone in the universe and is there a God? Those are the two questions that I focused on. And I was fortunate enough during my 4-year stay at Caltech when I became a mechanical engineer to have been blessed by outstanding professors. For instance, in physics, I had Richard Feynman, who went on to get a Nobel Prize and kind of introduced us all to quantum mechanics. And in chemistry, I had Linus Pauling, who was a fabulous mind in the world of genetics and DNA. And in one-on-one conversations with these two professors, I was able to corner them and pursue my interests. I asked, believe it or not, I asked Feynman if he believed in UFOs, and I asked Pauling if he believed in God. And the answers to those two questions I published in my first book, Adam, the Missing Link. And I was just driven from that point forward all my life to try to understand the questions of are we alone and is there a God? And after a 50-year career in business, I came back to my original pursuit, and I discovered my third great teacher, which was Zecharia Sitchin. I had a 10-year relationship with Zecharia. He taught me most of the basis of which I do my research on, and since he's no longer with us, I kind of have positioned myself as a disciple of Zecharia to defend him against all the naysayers and to expand. I wish he was still with us because I've discovered a couple of things that were published in my later books. The Anunnaki Were Here, the third book, and then the fourth book, The Mysteries of Alien Technology. I think I've uncovered some spectacular truths that I want to share with as many people as possible. That's why I'm enjoying having this conversation with you, because you're a man of the world, and I've admired the photographs that you recently posted on Facebook of Moray, Peru, and also Machu Picchu. Those are two sites that are near and dear to my my new theory about washboard gold mining. I'll repeat that again, James. I missed from Bolivia down at Pumapunka. That was a piece of evidence that I think ties the Anunnaki's civilization that they created in Mesopotamia, particularly in Sumeria. You know, the Sumerian civilization is a remarkable point in the history of man. If it wasn't for some outside influence, Zecharia and I talked about this. In fact, he pointed out to me once, he said, you know, Marshall, there's no real reason why we should be civilized. He said, if you look at some of these tribes that they've discovered in New Guinea and South America that have been untouched by civilization for thousands of years, they are Stone Age advancements. They only got the tools that were of the Stone Age variety, and they didn't need high-rise buildings, they didn't need cities, they didn't need all the things that the Sumerians gave us. And if you examine carefully this Sumerian civilization, you'll notice that there are about 100 of the first things required for civilization that appear miraculously out of nowhere. In other words, these folks came from nomadic tribal lifestyles into a city. And that does not happen unless there's some transfer of technology. And it appeared to Zecharia and also to me later on that that civilization was given all of those first. They were given the wheel, they were given writing, they were given philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, etc. Because those things do not occur naturally to Stone Age civilizations. They just don't come out of the blue. So it's remarkable to look at the fact that civilization as we know it today was actually given to us. In fact, in some of the writings, some of the translations that Zecharia produced, the people of the Sumerian civilization. The Sumerians themselves said everything we have was given to us by the Anunnaki. And that's where that word came. And they were sentient people. They were flesh and blood. In fact, in my second book, Gilgamesh 10, I recreate what it was like in the capital city of Sumer, which was Uruk, 4,600 years ago, when the Anunnaki lived side by side with humans. So it was the story of Gilgamesh, which is the first written story on this planet, tells of how they coexisted and what the trials and tribulations were. Where did the Incas and where did the Aztecs and the Mayans get all their gold? I mean, they weren't mining it. Well, they was told by their leader, Quetzalcoatl, who was an Anunnaki son of Enki. When in Egypt he was Thoth, and in Sumer he was Ningansata. Mm-hmm. So his ability to make civilizations out of these tribal people in Peru and in Central America. If you follow the story, the Olmecs, which was the first civilization, they were giant Africans, started mining gold in Central America about 3000 BC, around there. And from them came the other civilizations, and it's what's interesting to me, maybe you've heard this before, but if you haven't, I'll share it with your audience. In Sumer, the Anunnaki gave the wheel to the humans, but in all of the cultures in North and South America, the wheel was withheld. They never gave the wheel. And naturally, people evolving from Stone Age cultures don't invent the wheel. So that we have an interesting perspective on why the wheel was withheld in the new civilizations that were created in Peru and Central and South America. Why was the wheel withheld? And my answer to that is it's easier to control people if they don't have the wheel. The wheel leads to chariots. The wheel leads to all kinds of advanced parts of civilization that if you don't have it, it slows everything down. Okay, that's a good thing. I think people have to understand that the way you separate placer gold from river mud and sluice, you throw it through a sluice box, and there's a washboard design in there, and gold being 19 times heavier than water, when it bumps into the ridges in the washboard, it collects in the joints. And that's how most mining operations were done in our gold rush in 1849. Everybody came to California looking for gold, and they kind of dug up the mud from the riverbeds and separated out the gold by running it through a sluice box, which had a washboard bottom to it. And in my analysis of where all the gold came from that the Incas had, and that the Mayans had, and that the Aztecs had, I looked at the features of the structures that were built throughout that part of the world, Mesoamerica. And I noticed they were all step pyramids. Most of the, central feature of each of these civilizations ended up like in Chichen Itza with a huge pyramid that was a step pyramid. And I said to myself, that's a washboard. And if there was placer water nearby, and at Chichen Itza there was a cenote, which was an underground Mexican river that was filled with placer gold. All you had to do was pump it up to the top of this structure and let it flow over the washboard sides, and you'd separate gold out of the placer water. And that's a lot easier than mining it. In other words, most of the gold before the Great Flood that the Anunnaki were after and secured came from the African gold mines. But when the Great Flood hit, which was about 11,500 years ago, it flooded all their mines. It made them inoperable. And instead of trying to reconstruct that, I think, and this is where my theory comes in, they went to the alluvial deposits, the water that was coming out of the mine. Nature naturally strips gold from the veins and brings it down the streams and rivers around the mountains. And if you had a way of separating the gold out of the water, you could produce it without having to go through the process of digging it out and crushing it and smelting it and doing all the things that most deep mine golds have to do. So I looked at Machu Picchu. That was the first place that I went. And I said, that from a distance is a washboard design. All of those terraces in every direction. And it's at the peak of a mountain, a granite mountain that was sculptured. You know, the Incas didn't have tools to sculpt granite and make that design on top of that mountain. But if you look at the river that surrounds it, the Urubamba River, it comes down filled with placer gold, and it goes whipping around this peak that Machu Picchu was built on. And all you had to do was pump the water somehow out of the river up to the top of these terraces and let it flow over them and to separate gold. And I think that's why we see that design. And also at Moray, your Moray is a bunch of terraces. They're in circular format, but there's a river filled with placer gold. It comes right through the center of Moray, and it goes down into the Urubamba River, which is part of Peru, and heads towards Machu Picchu. There's another interesting site. I don't know if you went there or not, the Ollantaytambo.
Ollantaytambo.
And the same design and the same, I believe, function was going on there. And after I wrote the third book, The Anunnaki Were Here, where I pronounced and exhibited my theory of washboard and gave all the examples that I could find in that book, I was still puzzled by how did they collect the gold once it hit the terraces. In other words, I said there had to be some system of picking up the gold. And in my fourth book, I explained that because I discovered a Greek myth called Jason and the Golden Fleece. And I did some research, and I discovered that the Golden Fleece was a sheepskin that had been placed into a stream bed that had placer gold, and because the fibers of the sheepskin contain lanolin, a very sticky substance, plaster particles would adhere to the sheepskin so it turned completely gold. I said, aha, they needed millions and millions of sheepskins to put on the surfaces of all these structures that they built in order to separate the gold, right? So then I found Michael Tillinger's books where he talked about all these stone circles in Africa. He called tens of thousands of stone circles, and nobody could figure out what they were and what the function was. Well, it appeared to me that they could be a way of raising sheep. So I went to Google, and in the translations from Sitchin, Enki was the master of sheep folds. It's S-H-E-E-P-F-O-L-D-S. And when you look in Google for sheep folds, you find out it's a stone structure in which sheep are raised. So I put two and two together, and I said, these circles, by the way, are not only in South Africa. They're all over the place. They're in the Golan Heights in Syria, and they're also in Peru. Right, and in Peru, there's almost a duplicate of the Great Zimbabwe Wall. Well, for your audience's benefit, I have pictures, color pictures, and my format is 8.5 by 11, which is kind of like Life magazine. But in order to make Sitchin's, and I got his approval to do this, his stuff is kind of hard to read sometimes, and you have to really work at it to get information from his books. I said, I want to present your stuff in a Life magazine format that's easy with pictures and a few words. So I don't write a lot of words in my books. They're mostly, the story is told with color pictures. And in the last book, The Mysteries of the Alien Technology, I have over 170 color pictures that explain the stuff that I've discovered. And I discovered some amazing things in that fourth book, which like I told you earlier, I wished I could share it with Sitchin because from an engineering point of view, it makes a lot of sense that these structures like the Colosseum, the Pantheon, the Parthenon, and the temples on the Baalbek platform, and all of the Egyptian temples have architectural design features that were way beyond the level of the civilizations. In other words, the architect of those structures knew stuff that made them last for 2,000 years. We don't build things that last for 2,000 years because they're either destroyed by erosion or earthquake. Mm. If you look at the Colosseum, this is in the fourth book, it's built on a floating foundation, James. Below the Colosseum is a donut-shaped foundation, which is 42 feet thick, 42 feet deep, and 110 feet thick in a donut shape. And it supports the Colosseum as an earthquake floating foundation. And in the columns of the Colosseum are metal clamps. Now, a lot of the clamps have been removed. You can see the pock marks as you go visit the Colosseum. You'll see lots of pock mark holes. Well, that's where the metal clamps were. Mm-hmm. And metal clamps keep rigidity in the horizontal plane during an earthquake tremor. The floating foundation neutralizes most of the impact. So if you look at the Colosseum and you say, now, here's a structure that's over 2,000 years old. How did it survive? And then you see these, and I pointed out with pictures and diagrams, the magnificent architectural features that was not known, I'm sure, to the Romans. We just recently discovered the floating foundation as a way of keeping buildings alive during an earthquake. Wow. Japanese, I think, invented that. These are the marvels of I call them the most advanced stone architects that ever hit this planet. And the big monolithic stones at Baalbek was the beginning. I got started there and analyzed the platform that Enlil built, 5,000 square foot, supported by these huge 1,200-ton monolithic stones. And then I went to the wall at Ollantaytambo. They brought them from across the mountain, across the river, and up the hill. I mean, those kind of transportation challenges make Stonehenge look like a piece of cake. I'll be giving a workshop at Contact in the Desert in May of this year, May 29th through the 31st, and my workshop's going to be on the reverse engineering of some of these three major structures that will show that the architects were way beyond the talent that existed 2,000 years ago in Roman and Greek and Egyptian civilizations. All right, now if you look down vertically at that, James, yeah, it's a washboard. No, people don't look at it that. They look at it from the plane view. But if you look at it from the top side, that's three concentric walls that are all three zigzags. Yeah, and that's a step pyramid in another format, and the river that came down through there pounded. The reason for the cornerstones being so humongous was that the force of the stream in the spring runoff was incredible. The force that banged into the upper side of those walls, but it was a gold collection system, and most of the gold, I believe, that it was found at Cusco by the conquistadors came from that marvelous designed washboard gold collecting device. It all fits together. Exactly. How would you get it to last as long as it did? These guys were, I think maybe 1 million years more advanced than we are today, and they knew things that we're learning. In fact, some of the stuff we learned comes from reverse engineering things that they did. Now, I don't know, and I've tried as hard as I can to get my mind wrapped around how they built those walls. It's still...
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel, maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
A mystery. We see things that archaeologists call Inca walls. Inca walls are stones that are fitted together so closely that you can't put a razor blade in the joints. Mm. And that type of structure is elaborately displayed at the zigzag walls. I call them the zigzag walls. And how they got those stones in place and how they got them to fit. So it's watertight. In other words, when you look at it, basically it's watertight. And why would you build a watertight wall unless you were going to use water on the other side of it? So that reinforces my theory of the washboard gold mining. And here's something else that I will share with you and your audience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In the third book, The Anunnaki Were Here, and also in the fourth book, The Mysteries of Alien Technology, I do a reverse engineering job on the Great Pyramid at Giza, the inside complex. You know, everybody and his brother has tried to figure out what the heck was going on in there. I'm sure you've thought about it. And I asked Giorgio at the last meeting, I said, Giorgio, every passage and chamber inside the Great Pyramid is watertight. Why do you think they built it watertight? He said, Marshall, I don't know. And I said, well, I think I do. And I published it in my book. It, in effect, was a washboard gold mining operation. I'll try to explain it to your audience. It's difficult to do without the diagrams. But you know the Grand Gallery has a cobalt ceiling, right? It goes up at a 26-degree angle. Well, if you look upside down at the cobalt ceiling, it's a washboard. And all you had to do was force plaster water into this chamber and bang it up against the ceiling, and you could precipitate out gold that was in plaster water with the Nile River. The Nile River in the spring runoff strips placer gold from the Nubian gold fields upstream or downstream. It flows north. And they built a moat around the Great Pyramid so that they could get the Nile River water up to the entrance. The entrance is, you know, above ground, about 35 feet above ground. And it's a 26-degree channel that goes down to the pit, perfectly straight, bored through the pyramid itself, and then when you get to the base, it goes past the granite foundation. By the way, the pyramids at Giza were built on a granite mountaintop that was leveled. I illustrate that in my book also, that they leveled the mountaintop to have it as a foundation, a solid foundation for the pyramids. All those stones wouldn't do very well in the sand as a foundation. So the technology to level mountaintops took some really powerful tooling. But to get back to the inside of the Great Pyramid, if you look at it the way I described it in the book, the water surges down into the pit. And before we had electricity, James, we had a system called hydraulic pulse pumps to get water to go up. It was a sonic method of raising water. And that's exactly a guy named James Cadman did a series of research on the Pharaoh's pump.
Oh, yeah.
And illustrated that you could pump water using the inside configuration. Okay, well, I took it one step further. And with the hydraulic pulse pump, you could pump water up into the Grand Gallery against the upside-down washboard ceiling and collect gold in the 27 slots that are on either side of the Grand Gallery. And the proof positive that I've shown in my book, both books, was that when you get the water up into the king's chamber, there's a box in there, the sarcophagus. And if you look closely at the sarcophagus, it's damaged in all its outside edges and corners. In other words, you got to ask yourself, why would they put an imperfect design in the king's chamber? Well, maybe it was perfect in the beginning, but when the water got into the king's chamber, it floated that box, James. The sarcophagus box was floating. Archimedes' principle allows you to raise no matter how much it weighed, as long as it was hollow. And it banged around inside the chamber. As the surging went up and down, this thing is floating on a sea of water, and it's banging into all the surfaces, the ceiling and the four walls of the king's chamber, and it's chipping away at the outside edges of that box. And finally, one corner was chipped away to the point where the water got into the box. And once it filled with water, it sunk to the floor and stayed there. And I'll challenge anybody to tell me that isn't how the damage occurred on that sarcophagus, outside edges. And I show that through picture illustrations in my book. You can see very clearly that that beautiful piece of stonework is heavily damaged on all its outside corners. And the only way I could theorize that that happened is that it floated and it banged around inside that. And maybe it added some downward impulse. Maybe the reason they had the design was as the water surged up and down, this weight would help push the water back down to the hydraulic pulse pump through the system. So that's the theory, James. That's the theory that I've presented besides my washboard gold mining theory. Well, this is part of the washboard gold mining theory. I've said that the reason they put it inside the Great Pyramid in the beginning was they didn't want people to get the gold. They knew that gold would become attractive, so they concealed it inside. Well, eventually, they put it in the step pyramids in Mesoamerica, like Chichen Itza, on the outside, and they told the natives, this is kind of clever, that the gold belongs to the gods. You can work with it, you can make art out of it. When we come back, it belongs to us, you got to give it back to us. That's part of the legend of what's gold. Well, it all fits, James. I mean, I haven't proven either. I haven't proven the washboard gold mining theory, but I've put the pieces together. And to me, as an engineer, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that his mother was a queen, an Anunnaki queen. His father was human, but in their religion or whatever, they didn't call it a religion, but in their structure, if the female produced a child and the female was Anunnaki, then 2/3 of it, the other part was human, then 2/3 was Anunnaki. Like Gilgamesh was 2/3 Anunnaki because his mother was a full-blooded Anunnaki queen.
Wow.
Now, Sitchin and I had long discussions about how best to get his story to as many people as possible. And we both agreed that a movie would be sensational, and we both agreed that the story of Gilgamesh would be the first film of maybe a trilogy to bring forward the story of the Anunnaki. And so he did his thing, and I did my thing, and we said, one day we'll make a movie. Well, they produced a book called The King Who Refused to Die. Are you familiar with that book?
Oh, wow.
And it's a novel of the story of Gilgamesh. And I said, no, it had to be the real story. So in the second book that my wife and I produced, we did a screenplay novel of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I'm happy to report that we're currently in negotiations to make it into a major film with a trilogy to follow. Well, you don't have to go to Amazon. Those prices are exorbitant. You go to my webpage. In my webpage, I have a second page. The second page of my website is a bookstore. You can purchase directly from us all of the books in either the hard copy, the ebook version, or even in Kindle. AdamTheMissingLink.com is the major source. They're much less expensive than Amazon. And I would prefer people to take advantage of the second page of our store, and it has a little synopsis of each of the books, and it has the 3 different ways you can acquire it. And we are very proud of Gilgamesh 10 because we took the story on the 12 tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we transport the reader back 4,600 years to what it was like living in Uruk with Ishtar and with Enki and Enlil and the humans, and how they had to react with their king Gilgamesh. They made him king of Uruk, the capital city of Sumer. And it's a fascinating exposure which has never before been done. People don't realize that they coexisted. The humans actually lived side by side with the Anunnaki during the time of Gilgamesh. And the story, like you pointed out, is the most important bit of technology transfer, because he talks about the rockets and he talks about the landing platform and everything that the whole thrust of his life was to become immortal like his mother. And that's kind of a reflection on our society in many ways. So we're very hopeful that we will be successful. There's always a chance with Hollywood. You never know what's going to happen.
Sure.
And Sitchin made me promise. He said, you know, Marshall, if you ever get this to the point where Hollywood does do something with it, please, please don't let them make Enki the bastard son of so-and-so.
Sure.
Enkidu.
Enkidu.
I'm sorry. Enkidu. Clone. Yeah, he was a clone. They took Homo erectus, which was the species before us, and they found one that was big and strong, just like the king. And somehow Enki was able to clone his face onto this creature and civilize him. The story of how he got civilized is interesting.
Mm.
And then have him come into Uruk and challenge the king, because the people were complaining. The citizens of Uruk were very unhappy with their king. Their king was taking advantage of the brides. He got first rights to the brides before the husband, and then the people really got upset with it. So they wanted to get him out of town, and the way they got him out of town was Enki had this idea that if he made a clone and brought him in, and he could get them off adventuring. You know, the story, in a way, is the first action hero story ever written, because that's really what they were. They were action heroes, Enkidu and Gilgamesh, going off into the woods, adventuring and challenging the robots that the Anunnaki had produced to, you know, preserve their part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fascinating story, and I just hope that we can bring it to the public, because it will open the door to the fact that we coexisted, humans coexisted 4,600 years ago with this advanced species, who in effect were the creators of mankind. That story has to get out, James. We've got to get that to the public, or we're doomed to destroy ourselves. Well, 9 foot. You know, I think that Sitchin kind of analyzed the height of the Anunnaki, and they were. If you look at the steps, you know the steps that you found at Moray.
Massive.
Those were not easily climbed, were they? They were built for 9 foot tall people to get up and down. And if you go to Chichen Itza, the stairways are 12-inch steps. And I found these 12-inch steps in almost every major Anunnaki structure, from Angkor Wat to Chichen Itza to the temples in India and to the pyramids in Central and South America. And if you look at who could climb 12-inch steps, it had to be giants, 9 foot tall beings that would use a 12-inch. We use 7-inch steps. And when I went to my first discovery of this was in Sicily. It's called the Greek Amphitheater. I don't know if you've been there or not. My question here: if a Greek architect built this amphitheater for Greeks who were 5 feet tall, why would he put 12-inch stairways up the middle to get to the seating area? You know, they didn't. Anunnaki built the amphitheater in Sicily. What the Greeks did, James, is they built wooden stairways over the 12-inch. They built 7-inch staircases and covered over the 12-inch staircases so they could get their people up into what was left of a washboard gold mine. There's a river, underground river in Sicily that was filled with placer gold. It was pumped from the top of that structure, it's in Sicily, and came down over the limestone design that was cut out of a hillside. That whole structure was chiseled out of a hillside. And in my book, The Anunnaki Were Here, I go into great details. I was there and I took these pictures. And I show the 12-inch steps, and I show the 7-inch wooden steps overlaying them. And I also show the complete erosion of the limestone, water erosion. It's very, very obvious that I have close-up pictures showing that the water leached the softer part of the limestone out and left holes in it. So it's a perfect example of a washboard gold mine that later on, after they were done with that, and by the way, Sicily, Syracuse, Sicily, Saragossa, was known as a very rich in gold. And I think it came from that particular structure. Well, James, when people ask me how did they pump the water up, I say, I don't know. But if you could come from another planet to our planet and mine our gold, pumping water was a piece of cake. If you look at the complex at Palenque, underground hydraulic system that they had there with forced chambers, and the design was exquisite, way beyond the technology of the local Mayans, I'm sure. But I think that I've in my books, and I hope that they will be discovered one day on a universal level, that these theories, the washboard gold mining theory and the sheepskin collection system, and how the inside of the Great Pyramid worked, and how the design of the Pantheon, the Parthenon. By the way, the Parthenon in Greece is one of the features in my last book. It's made up of 70,000 individual pieces.
Wow.
No two of them are alike. They differ in dimensions by the hair's breadth. But if you were the general contractor and you had 70,000 pieces to put together,
wow,
you got to ask yourself,
that's crazy.
Who could have done that? And by the way, the foundation of the Parthenon is like a turtle. It's upside down. I mean, a turtle, it curves. The front portico curves, the sides curve, and the back curves. So if you're building columns that tilt inward and are not straight, they're all curved. They bulge out, because if you look at parallax design, it looks like it would sag. So in order to make the Parthenon not look like it was sagging, they put artificial curves into it. And I show that by illustrations in my book. And it's amazing that 2,000 years ago, somebody knew this and was able to take 70,000 individual pieces and assemble it into this magnificent structure, which is one of the most copied designs in the world. The Supreme Court and most of the capitals around the world have these type of porticos where they have columns.
For sure.
I would love to see that, because I haven't discovered everything I want to, but I know that the major sites that I published in the books. By the way, Angkor Wat is a fabulous floating foundation in a marshy area that got monsoons 6 months of the year. So you got to figure under construction conditions how you built Angkor Wat.
Sure.
And it describes in the book how they first built the moat around the lake with the retainer wall to keep the water out, so they had a dry area to build. And then underneath Angkor Wat is also a floating foundation, huge floating foundation that keeps the stones of Angkor Wat, which by the way are masonry stones with no mortar. All the designs that we see, like at the Baalbek and at the temples in India, and the many structures are put together without any masonry, except for the dome of the Pantheon. That's another interesting subject.
For sure. Yeah.
Sitchin translated, and I have to take this as what they said is what they wanted us to know. Everything they wrote, we have to kind of examine it in the light of, were they telling us the truth or were they spinning us? And I got into that with Sitchin. I said, sometimes I wonder if some of these stories were spin to do what they wanted to do without any oversight. For instance, I said, what do you think about the story of the mutiny of the miners, Zechariah? He said, Marshall, the record speaks for itself. He wouldn't go outside of what he had translated. He believed that what he translated was what happened, and that they were telling us exactly what the truth was. And I said, well, sometimes victors write the stories the way they want them to come out about the war and so forth. And maybe they had some kind of prime directive, and they wanted to break it so they could have help. And they went ahead and created a slave species on their own with this story to cover them. He wouldn't agree to that then. And also I said, for 200,000 years, Zechariah, they were mining our gold before, humans came into the picture. What were they doing with all that gold? They didn't need that much gold to close the ozone leak in the home planet. Do you think they were ingesting it in white powder format? Marshall, the record never said that. The special properties, and I think that if one day Earth suffers a huge ozone leak, we might think about flaking it up there with cold. That's what they heal it. And I would like to get the scientific community to come forward, the archaeological community, and say that either the theory of the washboard gold mining is bizarre or it's true. Nobody has come forward and challenged it. Nobody's challenged it, and nobody's really put their stamp of approval on it yet either. You know, in Peru they have this alpaca, circular stone walls that I found over there, which are designed exactly like the Zimbabwe walls and the walls at the Golan Heights. It's just, you can tell it's the same architect that built these structures.
So,
I'm very blessed with good genes, and I hope that I'm able to continue on researching and sharing. My whole object is to share with as many people as possible the story of the history of the Anunnaki and the impact it has had, and is still having on our civilization, humanity. Okay, great. Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it.